Two Doctors Homestead. My name's Daniel.
And I'm Janet.
And this is Coffee Talk. Before we get into the topic of the day, today we're drinking Javalia medium roast Colombian coffee. Very good coffee. So today we're going to talk about homesteading. What is homesteading, and what's it mean to us, and really where does it come from in terms of where's the word come from. We're going to talk about some similar terms kind of in the community, as well as what we're doing on our homestead, what we've been doing over the last couple years, and maybe some future projects that we might decide to work on. So first we'll jump into what is a homestead. I went ahead and Googled it just to get a sense for what's out there. If you look at the term homesteading, it goes back a long ways. They're even saying maybe the ancient Roman times, early American settlers, even to the modern day, the modern homestead movement, which you could say we're a part of, even unintentionally. So what does it take? What does that mean? I'm a homesteader. I say, hey, this is Two Doctors Homestead. Really the homestead movement, and as it's been historically, is characterized by self-sufficiency, right? So you look at what does that mean in the modern times? Well, self-sufficiency is going to be, hey, we have a garden, right? We're growing some of our own food. We have livestock. We're growing some of our own meats. Modern day, you might say, hey, I'm putting in solar. I'm living, I don't want to, mix it up with off-grid entirely, but you might be, right? As a homesteader, you might be off-grid or moving in the off-grid direction. You could take it a step further when we're talking about self-sufficiency. You could have your own sheep and harvest your own wool and make your own clothes, right? But in generally, it's categorized as, or defined as, that desire to be self-sufficient, right? And that's really what homesteading means to us. We didn't set out to say, hey, we're going to be homesteaders. It was really, we wanted to be more self-sufficient. I think somewhere along the way, we're like, hey, we're actually homesteading, right? So kind of looking at some of the other terms that would fall into that category is the idea of a commune. So there is some differentiation if you want, and it's okay if you don't, between a commune and a homestead. And the homestead really has been defined historically as a family or a family unit trying to be or striving to be self-sufficient, as opposed to a commune is more of a community, right? The word commune, community. If a commune wants to be homestead, that's fine, right? There's no great council of homesteaders that gets to decide who is or is not a homestead.
No homestead police.
Right, there's no homestead police. No one's going to take away your homestead card, right? But it kind of slips into the idea of a family homestead versus maybe a commune. Some other terms, you get prepper, right? You get prepsteaders, homesteading preppers, preppers that homesteader, homesteaders that actually probably prep more than anything. And once again, there's no prepper police that are going to come take your prepper card if you're more of a homesteader than a prepper. But the idea of prepping is different than homesteading, right? Homesteading, we said, is trying to be more self-sufficient, growing your own food, producing your own maybe power and other things. Prepping, which is popular and nefarious at the same time, just in the sense people like to give preppers a hard time, right? Prepping is sometimes synonymous with hoarding, which tends to be more socially unacceptable.
Yeah, hoarding is totally different.
Right, hoarding is totally different. But, they get that bad reputation. Maybe that's the word I was looking for. Preppers kind of a bad reputation, whether it's warranted or not. But the idea of prepping is really being prepared, right? The word's right there, prepare, prepper, preparer. The idea of a prepper is you're prepared. You're prepared for hard times, you're prepared for bad times, unexpected situations, and being a prepper can run the whole gambit, right? You could just be someone that lives in an area that gets a lot of storms. Maybe you're on the coast in Florida and you're prepared to bug out if a storm comes in. And what's that mean? Maybe you have there's bug out bags, or you're just used to when a storm comes, you get out of town. And I've got a friend with family in New Orleans, and they have generators, and they have food stores and dry goods and raw materials to rebuild their house because they're used to getting flooded out. Right. You could say that's prepping, being prepared, right? You could just say they're prepared for the next major storm because they've been through so many. That's kind of a natural prepper, right? You know, you live in an area that has bad winters, and you keep a couple blankets and some food in your car in case you get trapped in the car in the winter. Well,
I mean, that's how I grew up. I grew up in an area that was winter.
yeah, right.
And you kept a shovel in your trunk, and you kept, a blanket in your trunk, and that's just, and flares, that's what you did.
Right, and that's being prepared. You're
Right.
prepared for winter. Does it make you a prepper? Sure. It could. You could say, no, I'm not a prepper. I'm just prepared for the winter, and that's fine too. There is the other end of the spectrum of preppers where you've got, years worth of food stashed away, and guns and ammo and medical supplies, and you're ready for the zombie apocalypse, and that's okay too, right? And that's all within the kind of the prepper bubble of what you might consider yourself a prepper. So there's some other terms that float around. Survivalist, right? And when I say survivalist, I also think primitive survivalist. So a survivalist might differ from a prepper, because a survivalist could be a prepper as well, and maybe they're the same thing. But really, I think the idea behind the survivalist movement, which goes back before prepping, was that you knew how to survive, right? You had your Rambo knife with the little screw-off cap, with the fishing kit inside of it, and the matches, and you're going to take that Rambo knife, and you're just going to go live in the woods, and no one's ever going to hear from you again because you got your Rambo knife. And you're gonna go use the knife.
That's all it takes.
Right, that's all you need. You got your Rambo
Right.
knife, and you're gonna go build a cabin, and maybe make a bow or something like that, and survive forever. Right, survivalist, survivor.
Yeah, I don't think that's a homesteader.
Right, that's a different, right,
Because
different
I
category.
could never do that.
Right. We can raise a
Ever.
garden.
You're right.
Now I gotta
but
take
I
the
can't
Rambo
go,
knife and go live in the woods.
No, there's
right,
no
not
way.
gonna happen.
There's
But
no,
survivalist,
I could
right?
not survive.
Right, and then maybe you need more than a Rambo knife. Who knows? I mean, I don't know. You're a survivalist. You're ready to survive. You have those skills. So then you say primitive survivalist, you're like, wait, but he had the Rambo knife, he was a survivalist. Well, primitive survivalist, I think, really focuses on surviving with pretty much nothing, right? They're gonna be very primitive, they're gonna make their stick houses.
You make your Rambo knife out of a rock?
Right, you take
Okay.
your rock and your stick, and you chisel your Rambo knife, and you're good to go. You're really focused on that idea of primitive living. And as examples you see on modern TV, if you look at the show Alone, right? They go out with 10 items,
Yeah, they
and they're surviving, right?
Yeah.
They're going out
Yes,
with,
they
they've
are.
got their backpacks and their jackets and their sleeping bags, and they're gonna go survive as long as possible. I would call that more a survivalist. On the other side, if you see Naked and Afraid, they don't really get anything, right?
Right.
They don't even get clothing. So that I'd say more is primitive survivalist
Yeah.
versus a survivalist. And as we describe it, I draw very distinct differences between a primitive survivalist, a prepper, and a homesteader.
Yeah, I couldn't be either a primitive survivalist or a
Right.
survivalist.
Right.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
kudos to those people who can.
Absolutely. All right, the next thing we have on the list could be an off-gridder, right? I mean, the idea of off-grid, in my mind, is more about living off-grid, right? You're producing your own power. Maybe you have a well. You're producing your own water. You could be a homesteader if you're off-gridder. You could be a survivalist. You could be a prepper. You could be all of those things. But I do think it tends to be a different category, in and of itself. You say, hey, I'm an off-gridder. Maybe that means you're a homesteader. It doesn't necessarily have to be, right? It could be its own separate thing, or it could be, just another way to say homesteader or survivalist or prepper. I'm living off-grid. There's another one, and really it kind of encapsulates all of it, which is the idea of being self-sufficient. There's a great channel, Self-Sufficient Me. He grows his own food. I don't know if he considers himself a homesteader, or he just likes the idea of being self-sufficient. So I think it falls into, right? It's into that same bucket of what is a homesteader. One of the other sides, you kind of take that next step. Hey, I'm a farmer, which is awesome. Good for being a farmer, and we need farmers.
Absolutely.
Right, does that make you a homesteader? Not necessarily. I mean, if you're farming to grow food, to sell food, you might not actually be homesteading at all, right? I mean, you might not be driving to be self-sufficient as much as I grow food and I sell food, right?
Right.
Could be.
Specializing in your crop.
Right, yeah.
In abundance.
In
to take to
abundance,
market.
right, yeah, I grow potatoes, I sell potatoes. You don't necessarily have to be self-sufficient to be a farmer, though I suspect most farmers probably are very self-sufficient. It may be two separate things. A term we get out here a lot is hobby farm. You know, you could call it homestead or hobby farmer. You know, it's the idea of, hey, you've got a small, you know, you don't have 100 acres where you're growing potatoes, but you've got a small farm. You know, you maybe got some animals, you've got a garden, something like that. So another term you might hear, and I feel like it kind of falls in line with all the other terms. And then, you know, a rancher, of course, you know, if you've seen Yellowstone, you know, you're growing cattle, right? You're more of a ranch than a farm, which I think means you're more focused on livestock than on growing food, right? Even though livestock, of course, food. So that kind of hits homestead, like what does it mean, right? Grow some or all of your food, trying to be self-sufficient. So we were going to talk a little bit about, you know, our adventures in gardening here. For myself, I've been gardening a long time, right? Tried a couple different gardens, different states, lived in California, did some gardening there, lived in Washington, did some gardening there. I think we tried a little bit in Illinois. Maybe it's tough to do a lot of gardening.
Not when you have an HOA.
Right, yeah, we had an HOA, right,
Yeah,
so don't talk about
they
that.
were very against that.
And here we are now, you know, in rural Texas, doing some gardening here. You know, we started out when we got this place that had a tiny little garden, like 5 by 5, maybe not even that big. And you know, we gardened on that the first year until we had time to start laying out our own garden. Now we have a 35 by 50 garden, right? And that's our main garden, is 35 by 50. You know, we actually planted some fruit trees as well, and we built another 30 by 30 pen attached to the garden.
For the
you know,
piggies?
For the piggies, yeah, for the piggies, and we're doing some fall gardening in containers right now. So it does spread around a little bit, but we kind of have our main garden, and you know, we really kind of got started on that. You know, talk about the soil in terms of building a garden. One of the things is soil, and we've done a lot of work on the soil.
Yeah. Well, like the first year or so we were here, we had that small garden.
Yeah.
But we knew where we wanted to put our main garden, so we utilized all of our manure from our deep litter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, I would use what I consider the lasagna method,
Yeah.
which to me is just the way Mother Nature, you know, runs. That's how she does it. Is I just layered on our compost that we had from our chickens, and I would just spread it into the area that I knew that eventually we wanted our garden, and that was a lot of cycles of dumping our coop onto it,
Right.
letting it decompose in place and go down into the ground.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So we spent a lot of time building up the soil, you know, building our garden.
And we continue to build the soil.
Right,
It's a
we continue,
continual
right, constantly building up
method
the soil,
of
you know.
utilizing our animals to continue to bring in composted material. We don't have to buy compost, we don't
No.
have to add, we don't have to purchase soil amendments because we have livestock that we're utilizing to make that compost for us.
Right, and we use the term regenerative gardening. You know, we let the pigs in there when we have pigs, and it's that time, and they can eat the weeds and eat the grass, and you know, create their own manure.
They create their own manure, and then they stomp that into the ground,
Yeah.
as if, you know, you're in the wilds, your animals are going to be running through, you know, going through a forest, and they're gonna be rooting a tiny bit for pigs, and they're gonna be, you know, then taking that and turning that into manure and putting it into the ground, and just from their patterns of walking, stomping it into the ground. So we don't till.
Right.
We started with very deep
Yeah.
clay
Yeah,
type
a lot
soil.
of clay out there.
So it took a while for us, with the amendments that we had on top, which were natural amendments from the animals on the property, to really start to make that soil, you know, fluffier, because it brought in all the earthworms and the beetles and, you know, all the grubs and everything that came into the garden.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, my philosophy is try to mimic nature, and that's the best that you're gonna get, is try to mimic what nature does, because you don't reinvent the wheel. It's already been invented by Mother Nature, so
Right,
keep
absolutely.
going with
Yeah.
it.
No, absolutely. And as we were building the garden, and sort of the gardening tips, I know I did a video, 10 tips on starting a garden, when you're going to lay out your garden, certainly soil is a very important part of that, but also how do you want to build your beds? Like, you could row crop right in the ground if you're in the right
We
environment
row
for that.
cropped the first couple
Yeah,
of
we did
years
some
in
row
that
cropping.
space.
Yeah, absolutely. We switched to raised beds simply because we get a lot of water, right? We'll get a lot of rainwater in there, and it tend to kind of flood things out a little bit. So we found raised beds. I think they're 12 by 6. We did 12 by 6 raised beds in there.
The difference is, though, is if you're gonna do a raised bed in an area like that, what we did is we actually pulled our soil towards where we wanted our raised beds.
Yeah, we brought all the soil in,
We
piled
dropped,
it up.
it dropped then our walkways, because we knew that the area was gonna flood a little
Right,
bit.
right.
So we let the walkways flood
Yeah.
as opposed to
The entire garden.
the entire garden, because you wanna keep your soil.
Yeah,
The moment you start bringing soil in, that soil's sterile.
right.
You know, it's not alive, and you want it to be alive with microbes and all the things that are in it.
Right.
You know, fungus layers, webs. You need that for the garden, but they don't sell that.
Right, no, you just get a
They
bag of
don't.
soil and it's not the
You
same
get a bag
thing.
of sterile topsoil,
Right.
and then you're fighting trying to put amendments in
Actually
it
have it,
to
so it's
actually
good.
then regrow
Right, good healthy soil.
good healthy soil. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you're gonna do raised beds and it's
Yeah.
gonna be in an area like that, you know, you're either gonna have to add a lot of amendments and let it sit, I would say, for a year to then bring the life into that soil.
Yeah,
Or you can do what we did if it's an area that we knew flooded, we just pulled it into
right,
what
we
we
kind of
wanted.
mounded it up as we were building the beds, mounded it in.
Right.
So, now when you're gardening, starting plants, it can get really expensive if you're not careful, and it's all in what you're trying to do. So we did raised beds, so there were the cost of the raised beds. I see very fancy raised beds. You can spend a lot of money setting up a garden that you may never recoup, right? So it's something to keep in mind how you're doing it. If you want a big fancy raised beds with metal sides and all that, you might end up spending more than you'll ever get back in fruit and vegetables. So it's something to think about there. Same thing with how you plant, whether you buy plants or whether you do seeds. We've done seeds many times, and we'll set up little plastic cups inside, sort of using the house as a winter greenhouse, right, to start the plants inside and move them outside. That's going to be your most economic method versus buying full-grown plants. If you get full-grown plants, it's easier. Certainly, you've got a plant that's mature, you drop in the ground, and honestly, we've done both.
And there's some seeds that you can sow directly into the ground.
Right, and we've done that as well. Yeah, when
It
we did the
depends. I mean,
pumpkins.
you're gonna find it on your seed packet.
Yeah.
Or if you seed save, then you'll know what it is.
What
But yeah,
are
there's
you?
some that do better just directly into the
In the
ground.
ground, right? Yeah, and we did that. We did the pumpkins that way. I think we
Yes, the pumpkins went directly into the
right.
ground.
We just took the pumpkin seeds, planted them, and they took off.
Beans can go directly
Right,
into
beans
the ground.
we did directly
Corn
into the ground.
does, yeah.
Corn, we did the corn directly in the ground. We did buckwheat one year. Did a bunch of
Tomatoes will grow
buckwheat.
directly in the
Yeah,
ground too.
and then tomatoes.
If you have good soil and you put
Right.
it out at the right time.
Yeah. You just have to look at what you want to plant. As a tip from the 10 tips video, especially if you're getting started in gardening, grow stuff you already know you like to eat.
Absolutely.
Right, we tried.
Unless you have livestock.
Yeah, unless you have livestock.
And you
it
grow
doesn't
it for
matter.
them.
Right, it doesn't matter.
Because I grow pumpkins for my pigs and chickens.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, you certainly grow for your animals, and that will save you money. Like when the pigs had access to the garden, it probably cut our food costs in half.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
did
it
it because I
really
wanted
did.
to give them special treats.
Right, and special treats and the zucchinis and stuff like that. But don't grow stuff you wouldn't normally eat, right, unless you're just really experimenting. We grew okra one year, and it kind of reminded us we don't really like okra, so now all of a sudden you got all
I've
this.
never been a fan of okra.
Right, but we grew it anyway, So keep that in mind as you're gardening, as you're planning your gardening. And a theme is not bad when you're starting a garden. You could do a salsa garden and have tomatoes and peppers. You could do a salad,
Jalapenos.
right? You could do a salad garden and maybe try some lettuces or spinach and zucchinis and salad tomatoes. So I would kind of do a theme, especially when you're starting out. I think it makes it more fun. Right, you don't just, hey, I got a giant pile of vegetables. Now what? You're like, hey, I got salsa. Let's make salsa. Or hey, I got all the stuff from my garden. I'm just going to eat a salad, right, from that. But there's tons of options. Whether you're doing fall gardening, spring gardening, and different plants are good for different times of year. So you can keep that in mind. And some plants you can cycle multiple times throughout the year. There's spring gardens, there's fall gardens, and you can actually move your gardens between that. You can grow cover crops and then let those kind of die back down to enrich the soil. It's a lot of fun, and as you build up, you can do a market garden, right? We've not really wanted to get to the point of doing a market garden where you're growing food to sell. We did do an orchard. It's taken a long time to grow. Orchards take a long time, and we could see we had like 20 fruit trees, so that's more fruit than we could eat. So that's something we could have, like a market orchard someday if we're getting tons and tons of fruit every year, apples and all the different pears and all that. Then we could see saying, hey, that's going to be our farmer's market when we collect our apples and our persimmons and our pears and our peaches and all the other stuff from the trees. So keep in mind, on that, let me see. So some other things, right, on the homesteading side that we haven't gotten into is milk production, right? If you have livestock, you can produce your own milk if you want
dairy
goats.
cow, yeah.
Yeah, dairy cow if you want goats. And people do it, and you see the other homestead channels and homesteaders out producing their own milk. And certainly, as a homesteader, you know that's an option for you. Seems like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah, yeah. You got
A lot of people don't understand. Well, I mean, there's people who get into chicken keeping and they ask, "Do I need a rooster to get eggs?"
Yeah, right. Then you
And
don't.
and people are going to be like, "Oh, I just, do you just buy a dairy cow and it's ready?" No, it's
Right,
not.
right. It's gonna be a lot of work, right?
Like
And
you need to have that dairy cow has to have a calf
a calf, right, and start
and
producing
go into
milk.
lactation
Right.
to be able to then produce milk.
And then you have to milk them every day, multiple
A couple
times
times a day.
Right, every
And
day.
then, they should get a break, so you're gonna wanna dry them off
Yeah.
and then rebreed them again, and,
Yeah.
it's not easy.
Right, and same thing with goats. Are you prepared to milk multiple times a day? Like homesteading's not easy if you think it looks easy, but for people who
No,
want to
it's
produce
not.
milk, that's certainly an option. Collecting your own water. Now, it's hard to store enough water to actually sustain yourself for any length of times. People consume a lot of water, use water when you flush the toilet, when you wash your hands, when you do the dishes, when you do laundry. People use a ton of water. But if you have a well, if you have a property that has a well, you can sort of collect. I don't want to say produce because your water's water and you're not making water, but you can collect your own water. Whether you have a well, maybe you have a creek on your property. I don't think I'd want to have to survive 100% on collecting water from the creek and carrying it to the house in buckets. And then rainwater, there's certainly rainwater storage. You can collect rainwater. And some homesteaders
Maybe.
say they do that, right?
I mean, some
If it rains,
some
if
states
it's
it's
legal,
illegal.
if it's legal,
Yeah.
right? Actually, some states it's illegal to collect rainwater. So we're kind of talking about, hey, what are some of the things you can do, or that people do to be more self-sufficient, right? If certainly a garden jumps out right away to growing your own food, an orchard, to collect your own fruits, raising animals, something we do, and there's a ton of animals you can raise. And part of raising animals is milk production, collecting your own water. A lot of houses may just have a well, but you can put in a well to be more self-sufficient, so you're not dependent on city water. Producing your own electricity, once again, that's kind of touching in the off-grid, but it's certainly
Yeah.
part of the idea, the modern homesteader idea, is whether you have wind, whether you have solar, maybe you have a really serious creek and you can do a little hydroelectric. I've seen videos on people that have set up hydroelectric, but it's an option, right? You got to be careful on solar. We're putting in our own little solar system and see a lot of people talking about solar. It can get very expensive. So if you just said, hey, I'm off grid, I don't have to pay for electricity anymore. Well, you probably spend, it could be up to $100,000 on solar panels or $50,000 on solar panels.
Right.
So your electricity was never free. You just paid for it up front, and now you're off grid, which is great. Certainly an option, right? At some point you feel more self-sufficient as you're at least no longer dependent on grid power to some extent. Some other areas you could look at for self-sufficiency would be sheep, right? If you raise sheep, I know my neighbor was talking about raising sheep. You can raise sheep or even alpacas, right? Alpacas are there and
Yeah.
collect the wool, collect the fur, and weave it, spin it into yarn and weave it into your own clothing.
Yeah.
Your own blankets, right? If you want to be self-sufficient, you get those sheep and you You harvest the wool, and now you're making your own clothing, which it certainly moves you back in the self-sufficient category. Growing cotton for clothing, that's where cotton comes from. I'm sure it takes a lot of acres of cotton.
Oh, yeah.
But where we live is actually a cotton area. It's like the cotton capital.
Yeah, it's like the capital.
Yeah, it's a cotton area. People don't grow a lot of cotton out here, so if you really wanted to be self-sufficient, you could grow your own cotton, I guess, and harvest it and make your clothing out of that. Same thing on shoes, bags, belts, backpacks as leather, right? If you're harvesting animals for food, you can keep the animal hides and make your own leather. So that's certainly an option to move more self-sufficient. Let's see, so having kind of went over all that and everything we're doing here, you know, we have our garden, we have our orchard, we have our chickens, we raise pigs. We're not self-sufficient when it comes to water, though. We've got a couple projects I'm going to talk about that'll sort of move us more in that direction. We're starting to put in solar, so we're a little less dependent on the grid. Anything else? Yeah. So some of the things we're thinking about in the future, and you might see videos on as we're going forward. We have the fruit trees. I think we could put in more fruit trees. One thing about growing fruit trees is some of the fruit trees, a lot of the fruit trees require a pollinating partner, right? So you might not be only able to have one peach tree. You might need two different kinds of peach trees, right? So as you're putting in your orchard, and we might expand on our orchard a little bit, is you got to look at those pollination partners,
right?
Or you won't get a lot of fruit, right? They can kind of cross-pollinate, and the wind can blow between them. We have our garden, right? And we're constantly improving the garden and growing as much of our own food as we can. And we got some cool seeds from Baker Seeds that we want to try out.
Rareseeds.com.
Right, rareseeds.com. Very cool. We have our chickens. Like making videos on the chickens. We're probably going to do a coffee talk on chickens and really dive into raising chickens and whatnot. But we're incubating.
What to do, how to start for people who don't know how.
Yeah, right. No, absolutely. And we're incubating our own eggs. That's been a newish. We've been doing that for a little bit now, incubating our own eggs to raise our own chickens, which is awesome. A lot of fun there. We had ducks. We had ducks for about a year. I know we kind of mentioned that in one of the other videos.
Not my favorite.
No, pretty gross for a lot of reasons, and Self-Sufficient Me's got a video, 10 reasons why he doesn't want to raise ducks. And
I think if you raise ducks, you need to have a pond on your property.
Yeah, big pond.
And kind of like let them do their thing naturally, because they're dirty.
They are.
Yeah.
They're dirty.
I mean, if you think chickens are dirty,
yeah,
I would recommend getting ducks first, and then when you go down the chickens, you'll appreciate them.
You're like, oh my God, chickens are so
so
amazing.
clean.
They're so great. They're so clean. Yeah, ducks are gross.
Yeah, I feel like ducks kind of need to do their own thing on their own pond, far away from your house where you can't smell it, because they are.
Especially in any volume. I mean, if you have one or two ducks on your property, that might be different. We were raising them for food production. We didn't like the duck eggs. I didn't like the flavor. The dogs wouldn't even eat the duck eggs.
Yeah, they're very
got to the point. Yeah, we couldn't eat the duck eggs. So eventually we harvested the ducks, and we had a freezer full of 20 ducks. Peking duck. Yeah, they're Peking ducks. We had a freezer full of Peking duck, and we had duck sausage.
Duck tamales.
And whatnot. Duck tamales. Yeah, we made duck tamales. We did turkeys one year. Right, we raised turkeys. We had 3 broad-breasted.
Bronze,
Broad-breasted bronze turkeys one year.
Broad-breasted bronze, We had 1 tom, 2 hens.
Yeah, we had 3 turkeys, raised those up for Thanksgiving. And we harvested the first one just before Thanksgiving to time it out right, as we harvested the bird, cleaned it, and then it has to soak in a brine, and it's going to go through rigor. Right, so we timed it all. So when we had that turkey for Thanksgiving, it was fresh, never frozen. Right, it had never
that's
seen
another
a
thing.
freezer.
If you're gonna harvest a bird and think you're having it for dinner that night, and we've done that.
Yeah, you got to go quick.
You got to go quick. You got to know what you're doing. You really got to be able to harvest that bird fast.
Yeah.
Because once rigor sets in, then you're gonna have to let it sit in a fridge for a couple days.
Until rigor passes.
Then for the rigor to pass, to be able to have the muscle then relax. Because if not, it's gonna be like shoe leather.
Right, absolutely. So we did turkeys. It was expensive. Raising turkeys is very expensive. I think when we did the math, each turkey, and it's not to buy the birds. I think the birds are like $5. It was the food. We probably
They're sloppy eaters. Is the
They're
problem.
sloppy eaters. Yeah, they probably cost us about $100 each for the turkeys in food, just to get them to the weight.
And the wild game feed is more expensive.
Right. Yeah.
That feed is
feed.
more expensive than a chicken feed.
Yeah.
And turkeys, when they eat, they throw their head back and then like start chugging it,
Right.
and the food just flies out of the side of their mouth there.
Yeah.
They're not real big at pecking on the ground.
Right.
They just kind of take a mouthful and throw
And
it
chuck it
back, and it
everywhere.
just sprays
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, but they were great. They
I
taste
suppose
amazing.
if that's what you do and you know how to utilize the feed the best, I mean, if you look it up, they're supposed to have a 3-to-1 feed to, ratio.
Yeah.
So, which is good.
Mm.
I mean, but not for us. It didn't work for us.
Right, didn't work. I mean, we might do it again at some point and just go in knowing it's very expensive. We did the pig pen, right? We got our pigs. We were very successful on our pigs, very happy pigs, and we're gonna get more pigs probably in the springtime. Solar, we're building out our solar system. I got another video. We got some more panels, another charge controller. So we're expanding our solar, just to start, slipping away from the grid a little bit, moving some things over to that. So in terms of skills, right? As a homesteader, as a prepper, as a survivalist, whether you live in a commune, whether you're off grid, whether you're a hobby farmer, some of it does come down to skills. You develop those skills over time.
Right.
My son goes to school for agriculture, and I think he learns a lot of skills around agriculture. And I guess if you're involved in 4-H in high school,
Right.
You can learn how to raise animals. There's books you can read on the different skills you might need, but I mean, some of it it takes time. It takes
Some
time
of
to
it is
develop
doing.
those skills. It takes practice. It takes time.
It takes practice. It takes knowledge from other people.
Right.
The old ways of learning things is just passing knowledge down. So if you know someone in your area that does it,
Yeah.
pick their brain a little bit, because
Right.
they're going to know things that books don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, if you're new to homestead, if you want to get into homesteading, start thinking about some of the skills you might need. And animal raising's one, gardening's certainly one. We do our own butchering. It saves a ton of money, and we made a whole video on Butcher Day. But that's a skill, right? That's a skill
it's a
to
skill. It
learn.
might not be for everybody.
Right, might not be for everybody. Certainly construction, you're probably going to be building a lot of stuff. I know we're always building a lot of stuff. We built the chicken coop, we built the pig house, fencing for the garden, built an electrical box for our solar. So a lot of building. It's good to have at least a basic understanding of how to nail boards together. If you're starting out at homesteading, maybe not, it doesn't have to be required. I guess you can buy and everything's ready to go. But it's good. It's a good set of skills to have, right? So those are some of the skills you might want to think about. We talked about harvesting wool, spinning yarn. I mean, those are all very old skills and good skills to have.
And the thing is you're not going to always know everything.
Yeah. Right.
I've been gardening since, a kid. My parents were raised doing the victory gardens, back in the 40s. But you don't know everything about gardening. You're never going to know everything about it. You're never going to know everything about raising chickens or cows, because just like humans, things happen to different animals, and we all have our own skills. So, it's easier if you're more humble and go into it knowing that you can learn something every day from it. As opposed to, well, I know everything. That's when you kind of close your mind off. So homesteading is very much about keeping an open mind, and the eagerness to continue to learn things to make yourself self-sufficient. At least for me.
No, absolutely. It's all a learning experience, and you're sharing those moments with your animals and with your plants, and you're really kind of more connected, I think, to your world around you, as you try to bring things into the world and raise animals and even growing plants, growing your own food. I think you appreciate it more. I think you become more connected to that part of the world in a way you wouldn't get if you're just going to the grocery store every day and buying carrots and hamburgers and potatoes and that kind of thing. You
Right.
try to grow it yourself.
And we've
and make it
quickly
yourself.
come to the, prepackaged generation.
Yeah.
It's like I said, my parents were raised in a time that they had victory gardens and
Yeah.
everybody had 4 or 5 chickens in the backyard. Because even if it was the city, because they grew up in the city, they still had chickens in
Yeah.
their backyard.
Yeah.
You didn't go to the store and pick up those things.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's kind of trying to turn back time
Turn the
a
clock
little
back
bit.
a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because food tasted better then.
It does. Yeah.
Maybe
the food
it's
you grow
because
yourself
you
tastes
grew
better.
it,
Yeah.
or because it touches so many hands through the processing, so they have to do so much to it,
Right.
or it comes from so far, that
Yeah.
by the time it gets to you, it's lost a lot of its flavor.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
Well, and even on that is the variety of foods, and I think people don't even realize it. You go to the grocery store, maybe there's 5, different types of apples you might see, 10 different types of apples you might see at the grocery store. There's hundreds of types of apples out there.
Right.
They're just not what people are growing and selling in your area. I mean, if you
Right.
start looking at how many different kinds of apple trees there are, maybe there's
lot, yeah.
1,000 types of apple
Yeah.
trees. Um, there's a variety you just don't even see. Same thing when you're gardening.
but prior to globalization, there were even less
Yeah.
varieties. It was the varieties that were in your local area
Right.
that could get to your store before they went bad.
Before they went bad, yeah. No, absolutely. But I'm saying when you're starting a garden, you start looking at the seeds, and there's stuff you've probably never seen before. So many different kinds of carrots and melons and just across the board, peppers. Grocery stores have to focus on what sells. But when you're growing
Absolutely.
yourself, you'll open up this entire world. If I didn't realize there were 65 different types of carrots I could grow.
Right.
Right, and they're all going to
Yeah.
taste different. So you kind of unlock a whole secret world of variety.
You do. I mean,
You just
I
don't
like to
get.
plant purple peppers everywhere.
Right, purple
and
peppers
Just
and, yeah.
things that are interesting.
Right, things that are interesting, things you don't normally
But it's
see.
important to make sure that they will be abundant in your growing zone.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Check your zones. And some things are good one year and not good the next year. So that's just part of gardening.
That is.
Yeah,
And who knows why,
yeah.
honestly.
Right.
Maybe there wasn't enough nutrients in that bed that you put it in.
Right.
You might have rotated it to the wrong one and just not know it, or,
Yeah.
you could have, pressure from bugs or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's just don't give up is the whole thing.
Right.
Because you might not have a good crop of, maybe watermelons one year. And this past year, we had a bumper crop of watermelons. I mean,
Yeah,
it
it was just great.
They
just
kept going and
Same thing with
going and
zucchini.
going.
Giant. You see the videos, giant zucchinis.
Yeah.
And they just kept going out. Hey, look, 5 more zucchinis.
And that's the thing
Hey, look,
is,
5 more zucchinis.
right, a lot of people say,
Yeah.
don't let them get that big
Right.
because they don't taste good, but we were dehydrating a lot of it and then feeding it to the
Yeah,
pigs.
feeding it to pigs.
Too,
and everything.
but those zucchinis got that big within 3 or 4 days.
Right,
It
yeah.
was just whatever the weather was this
Right,
season
right.
was just absolutely perfect.
It was just great.
They would
They were just popping.
Go from a flower
Yeah.
to 5 days later like that.
Yeah,
long,
that big, yeah. We did those lemon cucumbers. Those were great.
Yeah, the cucamelons.
No, the little lemon
Oh,
ones.
the lemon ones?
the
Yeah,
lemon
those are
ones.
delicious.
Those were actually, I never even seen those
Yeah, it
before.
looks like a lemon.
Right.
But it has like the
Little
variation
stripes, yeah.
stripes of like an old school cucumber, and
Right.
it tastes like a cucumber, but just with a little
But it's a
zing.
lemon. Yeah, so you
Yeah,
just
I
find
seed
so
saved
much
some
stuff.
of those
Right,
because
yeah.
they were heirloom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just unlock so much stuff when you're growing your own food and gardening, and the flavor's better and it's fresher. And you're less dependent on the world. The world's becoming less reliable right now. So some of our future projects, things you might see in future videos that we're looking at, little rainwater collection. We haven't been doing a ton of that. We're thinking about putting in some rainwater collection. I've wanted a greenhouse for a while. We're going to build it ourselves. We're just kind of waiting and seeing where we want to put it. And lumber prices just fluctuate so much. But I'd like a big greenhouse and actually incorporate some aquaponics to it. So it's a project we have on the list. Is build a fish pond into the greenhouse. And I've built fish ponds before, and do some rotations of the water between the fish and the plants and whatnot. So that's
Right,
certainly
because
on our project
the
list.
waste of the fish feeds the plants
Right,
constantly.
yeah. So that's on our list. More solar, always more solar. We're selling more pigs, right? We want more pigs.
I love pigs.
Yeah, I love having
Yeah.
pigs. We're gonna try different kinds of pigs. So I think that's it. That's all I had.
And more chickens,
Yeah, always more chickens.
as always.
Right, we'll be
If you're
incubating more
chicken
chickens.
tender, you know that there's chicken math, you can never have enough
Right, you
chickens.
never have enough chickens. You wanna talk about, well, I guess maybe we'll hold it for the chicken video when we talk about the color project.
My color, yeah,
Yeah, we'll hold that for the chicken video.
because that's all chicken genetics.
Right, yeah, we'll get into chicken genetics a little bit in the chicken video. But that's all we got. Thank you guys for joining us for
Yeah, thank you.
Homestead Coffee Talk. So this is
Appreciate
our
it.
third episode, and many more to come. We're already laying out a few more episodes we want to do.
Alright.
So
If there's anything you wanna know, or any questions you wanna ask, or
Yeah.
any topics you want us to cover, just let us know down in the comments.
all right, we can share what we know, what we've learned on
Right,
our
we can
journey.
do a Q&A if you want, just
Yeah.
anything.
All right, absolutely. So like, subscribe, share, of course, if you enjoy the content. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next video. Thanks, guys.